lost myself.
Hey everyone. All right, if you've ever been in one of my sessions before, then you know that I tend to overplan. So we're gonna jump right in, and there's no waiting room. So as folks are joining us, they can just join us at whatever point we are at. Okay, I am gonna keep my video off for now, just for ease of bandwidth and such. And welcome to MTSS MicroPD and open discussion. And these micro professional developments are going to be fueled by you and the topics that you submit in the areas that you are looking for the most support. And the idea is that we will meet every Thursday, but it's likely that that day will change. I'm going to try to gauge and see what time or day hits the majority of folks that are looking to attend the sessions. So the sessions will cover a variety of topics, and as I said, they will be submitted by you, the field. And if you ever come into a session and you're like, oh, that topic's not relevant for me, then no hard feelings if you decide you've got other things that you want to do with your hour. But the way that this is set up is I'm just going to go ahead and advance the slide. So for the MicroPD framework, I am going to be following a relatively consistent pattern of exploration, perspectives and resources, and then a wrap up. And this, hopefully the actual PD part will take about 30 minutes, and then the open discussion then can be about 30 minutes. And if you know me, you know I tend to go over. So I really tried today to not do that, because I would like folks to have time to discuss what they saw today, and then any other things that they would like the support of their peers. I'll probably remain relatively quiet during the open discussion, so don't be afraid to ask questions. And if you are someone that has experienced the same thing or has some knowledge for your peers, please offer it. Okay, so today we are going to be talking about student engagement in a hybrid model. And the challenge that was presented is how to support students on their remote days. So for the exploration part, we're going to be looking at and visualizing engagement and accountability. And then we're going to go through a process where I am going to ask folks to unmute and offer suggestions as we go through the process of assessing the challenge. And then we're going to head into perspectives and resources. And this is where we're going to talk about some ways that you can integrate MTSS into your hybrid learning model. I'm going to provide some links to some supportive resources that I have found and collected for you. And then we're going to do a wrap up. And there is actually another interactive activity that we'll do for the wrap up. And again, I'll ask folks to unmute and either offer suggestions or, offer suggestions. Okay. So for the exploration phase, what we're going to do is we're going to think about and visualize what exactly we think engagement and accountability look like. And I know that this might seem like, yeah, I know what engagement is, but I really want you to think about how engagement in school and how engagement in a virtual class might be similar, and then also might be different. And then the same goes true for visualizing accountability. What does that look like when you're in school, and what might that look like in a virtual class? And so if you'd like to offer, go ahead and unmute yourself and let me know what you think.
Well, I'm pretty familiar with non-examples.
Oh, I have to turn my radio up. I couldn't hear you. I'm sorry, could you say that again?
Sorry, I thought two people spoke at the same time, so I didn't want to interrupt him again. But I was kind of making a joke about, I know what non-examples look like about engagement in the classroom, because that tends to look like kids being silly or focusing on the chat options, or focusing on different tools and silliness, things that they can do with their computers and devices during Zoom.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to assume that the opposite is what engagement looks like.
Which would probably look like eyes on the screen, not clicking on things, making eye contact with the teacher as best as they can.
Responding to prompts,
Mm-hmm.
that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else have anything to offer about the differences between engagement in school versus engagement in a virtual class?
One of the things that I notice about the difference is that in the classroom, the kids are more likely to respond to each other than when I'm on Zoom. When I'm on Zoom, they seem to only respond to me. They don't necessarily interact with each other as much.
Okay, yep. What else? What about accountability? Let's move on to accountability. What about accountability in school versus accountability in a virtual model?
I feel like I get the sense I get is that the parents feel that they are more accountable for their kids' work than just the kids. Whereas when the kids are in traditional classroom, it is 100% their responsibility, versus when they are working remotely, it becomes more of like a group effort.
Oh, that's an interesting perspective.
I'm a school counselor at an elementary school, and I feel like in the traditional sense of school, the kiddos did the work and I might send something home for the parents, but they weren't necessarily hearing the lessons and seeing everything that we're doing. However, now that there's pieces and follow-up activities on Seesaw, the parents are able to see and comment, and there's a nice connection that we didn't have when we were virtual in the springtime, that there's now that connection and accountability to the work that they're doing. And I am having a lot of kids turn things in and parents comment.
Would you say that adding in the parent engagement and participation increased the accountability of the work?
Well, I started doing a joke of the week, and there was an interactive way of doing it. So I think there was a little bit of a lure for the kids to come back to my page each week because they wanted to see what the new joke was. And then they started sending me some jokes back. So now I'm highlighting other kids' jokes. And so I think that it might have been that piece that maybe hooks them in. And then the parents get the notification that something's been submitted on Seesaw. So then they're looking and then they're seeing the work and commenting.
Gotcha. Okay. All right, so now that we've had an opportunity to start thinking about the differences between visualizing engagement and accountability in the two different worlds that we're living in, let's go ahead together and we're gonna assess this challenge. So the overarching need that we're looking for is increasing engagement. You're gonna see if I'm a good speller. Which apparently I am not. Increasing engagement, accountability, and we haven't talked about motivation yet, but I am going to go ahead and add motivation because it is going to come up. Okay, so based on the conversation that we've had so far, what are some of the potential barriers that children might encounter in the virtual classroom, whether it's Moodle or eBackpack or Seesaw, Google Classroom, whatever it winds up being? What are some potential barriers, do you think, that might stop them in their tracks from being engaged and accountable and motivated?
I think one of them is that children are all in different places when they're not in school. So some may be in daycare settings, they may be at grandparents, they may be at their parents' place of work. So trying to do synchronous learning when especially young children may not be home.
Right.
They also might have different teachers across the days. Like they might have one day that one person supports them, and then the next day it's a different person supporting them, and they might have different styles.
Okay. Any other potential barriers that might be contributing to engagement, accountability, and motivation in the virtual classroom?
Just organization and access to the materials. I think teachers are doing the best they can to send everything home and make it easily accessible, but that's a piece that's very easily lost when you can't pull something out and hand it to them.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I was going to talk about, is the executive functioning of students. That we know some are pretty organized, and if they're lacking some executive functioning skills, it can make it very difficult for them to plan and organize and get things turned in.
Also, just having a space to actually do their work in. And I don't know if this is similar to number one, but just having a physical, this is where we do our classroom work at home or at dad's work or whatever. But just having a physical, this is my kind of desk at home or not in school space.
I'm going to add that to number one, because I do think it's relevant, because you just never know if, the daycare setting has something else going on. And so they move a child to a different room, or, grandpa's sleeping and normally you do your homework in that bedroom, but now you can't go in there. So you're going to do it over here today. So I think that is relevant to the setting piece. And does anybody have another one that they can think of before we move on?
So I'm not sure if this goes with two or if it's separate, but a wide range of clarity. Everyone has very different expectations. We don't necessarily know what are we accountable for, because it's a little bit different than it's ever been before. And every school and every teacher, it has different expectations as far as, is it a choice or do you have to do it?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think that's separate a little bit, because different teachers are going to have different styles no matter what, right? So if you're in a social studies classroom or you're in an art classroom, each teacher is going to have their own style. But one thing the child, not the children, have to support that is rapport, camaraderie, relationships, some of those other things, which are much harder to not only establish in the virtual world. So you have to make sure that you're almost doing extra relationship building when you actually have them face to face, but also it can be hard to maintain, right? Because people are a lot different behind a screen than they are in person. And that, I think, goes for students as well. And so I think clarity of the delivery is a different piece, because having some kind of way to know, like what is a choice, like you're saying, what is required, what's being graded, what's not, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, does somebody want to be brave and come up with a goal? So what would be our goal if we were shooting for one? And it can just be, I realize we're working on minimal information here.
Andrea, I might just add that a goal might be to address each individual child's learning experience in the home environment. And with that, like adding to potential barrier number one might include, there's maybe other children at the table also. And so, is this an individual task? Is this a group thing? How do I manage what I need to be doing in the presence of my siblings? So it's really about, what does that child need in the setting that they're living in?
Okay, so the way I'm going to write that to pull in our need and our goal is increasing student, do we want to call it work completion? Because at the end of the day, it's completing and submitting work, right? Does anybody disagree vehemently about that?
I want them to be happy too.
Oh, yes, of course. So increasing student engagement, accountability, and motivation by creating classrooms that can adapt to multiple settings and homeschool situations through feelings of happiness and work. Okay. And that's it, that's spelled. Okay, all right, so we have assessed the challenge. Okay, we are hopefully going to come back to that as we move along through the perspectives and resources. So this is probably a review for most, but the keys to student motivation. So these are some things that we have to pre-think about like we normally would, I think, as we're looking at how to keep kids engaged and how to really tap into their motivation. And, you know, pie in the sky would be that we can tap into a child's intrinsic motivation so that we're not constantly trying to extrinsically motivate them. And the two keys for intrinsic motivation tend to be value. Do the students see value in the assignment? And some research indicates that value can be broken down into 3 different constructs. So relevance, activities, and relationships. With relevance, you know, you would hope that a child would be able to create their own sense of relevance for their work, but that might not necessarily happen if they are low in self-efficacy or low in whether they, you know, actually see value in that activity. And so a couple of ways to consider that is with younger kids, you know, bridging the assignments from home to school. I know there's been a couple of situations even with my own kids that, you know, we're doing stuff at home and then I'll ask my child, you know, did your teacher, you know, how did you do on that assignment? Or how did you do on this? What did your teacher say? And he was like, we don't look at the stuff that we do at home. My teacher doesn't look at it. And so there's a little bit of a, why do I have to do this if my teacher isn't going to look at it kind of thing. So that goes back to that clarity piece that we talked about in one of our barriers. The activities need to somehow strike a balance between active and, you know, product, right? Because we want them to show what they're doing. And then relationships. And we mentioned that before a little bit earlier, that, you know, the relationship piece in this case is kind of having to double up in a way on the in-person days so that you can fill that bucket so that they have, you know, a sense of belonging and wanting to participate in that virtual setting. So relationships and, you know, can be a very big piece of valuing the work and then being intrinsically motivated to complete it. The other one is success. So do students believe they can be successful? Have you set up your virtual classroom so that students look at it and say, I can do this. I have practiced this. I know what each teacher wants, and I can do this. I can navigate this. So how the systems are set up can either foster or deter feelings of success and self-efficacy, right? So if you have a child with those executive functioning you know, skills that are still developing, then, you know, the idea of, you know, Seesaw or, you know, Google Classroom, Moodle, whatever you're using, might actually make them say, yeah, that's really complicated, it's uncomfortable, and I'm just not confident that I'm going to be able to navigate that. And so perspectives and resources, we're going to talk about a few ways that we can think about this issue, this engagement and accountability issue through the lens of MTSS. And so if we think about MTSS and the core aspect of MTSS, we're looking at, you know, the fluid integration of academics, behavior, and social and emotional well-being. And then of course we have our 3 tiers of support. So you have your tier 1, your universal setting, and then supporting kids, you know, tier 2 targeted, and then tier 3 intensive for kids that really need something extra. So this MicroPD is going to cover the following MTSS components: levels of support for all students, data-based decision-making, and school and family engagement. So incorporating remote days into the multi-tiered system is probably opposite than what you want to think about it you know, the way that maybe you think about it just when it crosses your mind. So lots of people think, or I think maybe one of the things that I've heard by a couple of people, I'm not gonna say everybody, but a few people, is that I get a lot of, how can I do MTSS in a virtual classroom? I invite you to flip that around. How can I, through my school's MTSS, enrich or revitalize or, you know, create Google Classrooms or virtual classrooms that are accessible to as many children as possible? And so I kind of made this up, that there's a tier 1A, which is your school and classroom. And then there, when you think of a hybrid, there's actually a tier 1B, your school and your virtual classroom. And that in this kind of back to the future kind of different realm, you know, this space-time continuum, you know, conundrum that we find ourselves in, it looks like September or October, I guess, but it's way different than any October than we've ever experienced before. That a lot of your tier 2 and tier 3 supports, at least in terms of engagement and accountability, are going to happen in the school setting. And then, yeah, there are some things that you can do at home, but that actually falls, like some of you were saying earlier, onto that parent participation piece. So, you know, there are probably things that you can do that are tier 2 and tier 3 related, but the place to start, I think, is how you can use the school and the in-person time to provide any additional supports in engagement, accountability, and motivation. And so when you think of MTSS as the driver of your virtual classrooms, then you see that, you know, in a lot of ways, you still are aiming to reach at least 80% of your students. If your school is logging, you know, 80% work completion, 80% of, you know, kids bringing things in completed, getting things done, engaging in the in-person, and bringing in stuff that they were asked to do at home, you're doing pretty good. And then you're always going to have those kids that are going to need something extra. And so, and it gets a little complicated with those. And so if we think of the MTSS as the driver of the virtual classrooms, we can kind of look at it from a different angle and see how we can use a tiered structured system to leverage these virtual classrooms, which hopefully will then leverage the engagement and accountability. And of course, your MTSS is going to be made up of your, in this case, is leadership, systems and structure, the teachers, and of course, the family. So when we choose a virtual learning management system, we tend to choose them for cost, functionality, availability, but sometimes I think we forget to think about things outside the box. So what does that learning management system, what doesn't it have? And some of the answers to that question are the same across platforms. It doesn't have, you know, an in-person teacher. It doesn't have, you know, the anchor charts from the room. Like there are things that it doesn't have that are going to be important for students to feel welcomed and engaged in that space. And then some of them might have too much. Like if there's too much going on in that learning management system and it's too noisy, that in itself could be something, somewhat of a barrier. And so we've got a little double mountain here. We've got the school 1A, tier 1A, the home tier 1B. You know, these are the myriad of different platforms that are out there. And then assuming that primarily your tier 2 and tier 3 supports in these three areas, the engagement, accountability, and motivation are going to come primarily from school, and then hopefully they're going to generalize those as they're completing work in the home environment. So just to kind of recap, some common barriers with learning management systems are assumptions. We assume that kids always know exactly what to do, where to go, and how to navigate that depending on where they are, who they're with, and what kind of day they're having. Clarity, someone mentioned clarity before, that there needs to be a way to create clarity within these systems so that teachers can feel like they have freedom to be able to be themselves and really work through their style, but also so that it's crystal clear to the student, because the student is the person that we are creating the learning management system for. Another common barrier is that noise. You've got your kids with ADHD, your highly distractible kids. You've got your kids that, you know, have not only tangible things that they can be playing with, but they've got the mouse and the clicker and all the different features in some of these things. So how noisy is the learning management system? Are there a lot of is it Jiffies or Giffies? I don't even know what it is. You know, is it noisy, or is it relatively quiet and calm? Is there consistency? Are lessons posted in the same way at the same, I don't want to say at the same time, but in the same way consistently across the week, across the month, across quarter? Because the more consistent that we create the system, the more likely that we're going to build some of those neural pathways, and some of these things are going to become, you know, second nature or a lot easier. And if I'm not working so hard to feel comfortable in the learning management system, I'm more apt to dive into what is actually in there instead of worrying about how I'm even going to get through navigating it. So the systems can be very complex, especially if they don't have clarity and consistency. And they're also very flat. And you might think that that's like a juxtaposition. There's complex and flat, but we'll talk a little bit about what I mean by flat in the next slide. Okay, so in a regular classroom, tier 1A, you've got routine, you've got consistency, you've got responsiveness, supportive people, your lessons are guided, and it's really supportive of children and their varying levels of the way they present in school. In your virtual classroom, it can be very overwhelming if we're not, and so these are things that if you're not intentional about them, so just to put that out there, they can be very overwhelming, they can be very inconsistent, and that can go from teacher to teacher, or even just one teacher doing something differently every time he or she posts. There's delayed response in a learning management system. If I have a question or a concern, or I come up to a point where I can't move forward, if I don't have a parent or another adult that is able to help me, I have to submit a question or a comment, and I have to wait either for that to be answered or for the next day. And then I might forget to ask it again or to seek that clarity. And that goes true for delayed support. You know, supports are delayed. So we have to build in as many as we possibly can. And children are expected to be independent. And if you've got a kiddo that really struggles with independence inside your classroom, it's super important that we're creating these systems so that if they, you know, they can navigate them as best as they can, because they're actually required to be independent. And if a child is not, then they're going to have a hard time engaging, being accountable, and motivated to actually do the work. So we want to make tier 1B look as much like tier 1A as we possibly can. So think to yourself just for a minute, who are the kids? See, I'm going to go over about 15 minutes. Who are the kids that are going to struggle in this environment before the learning even starts? And let's see if you think of some of the ones that I thought of, and you'll have a chance to offer different ones in just a moment. But I was thinking poor work initiators are kids that need someone to come over to them and help them start the work. Kids that thrive on routine, if there's that inconsistent piece to the virtual classroom. Kids that are naturally disorganized, that came up in our barriers. Struggling readers. So, you know, yeah, there's video. You can record yourself doing a lesson on video, but that is also very passive learning as well, because I might play the video on my laptop while I have my head over there looking at why the cat is sitting on the mantelpiece, right? And so I'm kind of paying attention, but not really. So I really have to go back and either be willing to rewatch the video, or I have to read the directions. I have to read and figure out, and if I'm not a good reader and there's nobody home to read it for me, I need that as a student set up to, in as many ways as possible, to support the struggling reader. Kids that are easily overwhelmed, kids that are social butterflies and feel lonely in the virtual classroom setting because they don't have friends that they can bounce ideas off of and laugh with and joke with. They're isolated. kids with low self-efficacy, emotionally fragile children, kids that experience a challenging home life, and anything else. Did anybody else think of something that I did not add to the list? Okay. So perspectives and resources. The Tier 1B setting, I want you to think about setting that up on something that I stole from somebody else called setting it up on a curve. If you have been in sessions with me before, you know that I'm a huge fan of Shelley Moore. Shelley Moore is an inclusion guru. She spends her life studying and working on how to make classrooms more inclusive. And I'm not going to show the video because it is 5 minutes long and we don't have that kind of time, but she has inspired in many ways the way that we can start thinking about our universal setting, particularly in a multi-tiered system of support. And so you want to design your virtual classroom with the hardest to reach in mind, because the other kids, it's not going to matter to them necessarily if, you know, because those that are self-starters, those that are able to handle it on their own are going to handle it on their own, whether the system is set up more structured or whether it's not. And so there are a few things to keep in mind that can help support the hardest to reach. The title of your classroom or your class should be very brief and very clear. So it should have class name, teacher name, and a block or period if that's relevant for your age group or the kids that you're working with. You want to make it as easy for them to recognize where they need to be as possible. You want to avoid using any streams or other announcement-like spaces on the regular. You really ought to save those things for high importance announcements and emergencies. And the reason I say that is because some of the online learning management systems allow you to drop documents and resources in the stream. And if that happens, and then that document or resource doesn't also get posted in the lesson, kids that didn't read the stream are gonna miss that there was something in the stream because they went straight to their classwork. The other thing is the streams can be very, very noisy. You know, yes, you can turn off commenting in most of the management systems, but if you're posting videos, if you're posting, you know, memes, if you're posting things that you're trying to use for engagement and relationship building, it can be a distraction to a point where kids may not ever get to the actual classwork. Here's something, make sure that you're setting up, or consider, I should say, setting up your classes by date and not by topic whenever possible. Because even as adults, college kids, even high school kids, we don't organize our lives by topic. We organize our lives by time and the calendar. So I know on Thursday, I need to get up, I need to make coffee, I need to bring the kids to school, I need to work, I need to pick the kids up. Like, I don't say, okay, today, how are my kids getting to school, pick up and drop off, right? That's just not the way that I think about it. I put those items into a time block, or, because my Thursday is different than my Friday, is different than my Wednesday. You get the idea. Every material that a student needs should be contained in one lesson, and because you want to reduce the clicking around in order to be able to find things. Teams of teachers, grade levels, should set up their classes the same way. And I see, I can't see you guys, but I'm sure some people are like, yeah, we're never going to be able to make that happen. You can encourage it, because again, you want to create that clarity and consistency as much as possible. Inside the lesson, the teacher can be as creative as they'd like to be. But I think if you really want to start creating some of that ease of use with the platforms, you really want to have as much, you know, framework as you possibly can to support that. Utilize your camera to build community. What I mean by that is, if you have a particular anchor chart in your room and you know that Sally and Jimmy just always seem to go to that anchor chart when it's time for them to write paragraphs, or it's always and or they always go to that same anchor chart when we're doing long division because they really need to remember the different steps of the long division. Yes, I could give them a different piece of paper that has the steps of long division on it. Yes, I could give them a different piece of paper or flyer that shows them how to, write paragraphs, but it's not going to be the same. You want to create as much of a community into your class as possible. So if you're posting a writing assignment, go ahead and try, if you can, take a picture of the actual anchor charts that you might have in your room, because those are going to create that sense of belonging, because it's going to be familiar and it's going to mean way more to students to see that than it is to see just a random printout that you found on Pinterest or in a textbook. Other things about building community is if you've got kids with, their video and photo releases, you could post pictures of them, pictures of their peers, pictures of them working, maybe one picture in the lesson just to kind of, oh yeah, I don't get to see John today, or, oh, that was a really fun day, or something like that. Minimize small black text on bright white backgrounds. If you know anything about Google Classroom, you know that this is very hard to do because you can't change any of the background settings in Google Classroom. Even like Google Docs is another way that it can be difficult to create a non-bright white background. But black text, tiny black text, and a lot of it on white backgrounds is going to create barriers for your struggling readers. It's okay to increase the text size when kids are working online. You should try to put a very light color behind the black text as best as you can. And because those are things that are going to make it that much easier for them to access it. Even my own son, who has had his struggles with learning to read, when I increase the text a little bit and put it on a colored background by copying and pasting whatever his teacher has posted, I find that he's much more willing to engage with it, because he'll tell me that the things don't pierce his eyes as much. That's the word he said. And so you can incorporate that into your Google slide or whatever piece that you used to deliver the lesson. Include a checklist, agenda, or to-do list with each lesson. You'll have kids in your classroom on in-person days that always need that to-do list. They need someone to come and help them do this first, do this next. When you're done, go here. And we often assume that kids are going to just hop into a lesson and know where to start. Some kids are not going to know where to start. They might open up one thing and they haven't opened up the thing that they needed before, and they'll say, I don't know how to do this, and close it out and not do the work. You can integrate PBIS elements, and you'll want to make them explicit and easy to use. We're going to talk a little bit about that. You can encourage parent participation in the LMS, which will also reduce their email too. So parents that might be, they might receive email in their workday, then they're getting emails from home, they might have multiple children. If you use a parent engagement participation and you make that like a habit of work for the parents, it can actually reduce their email, and it can make it easier to keep track of like what was responded to and what wasn't responded to. And then don't forget to include specialists in the LMS design whenever possible. So when you have put together your lesson, don't be afraid to have the special education teacher look it over, or the speech and language pathologist look it over, and see if there are things that they can recommend that might be barriers for the kids that they serve during the day. And then this is wide and bold, but you might want to consider as a principal, for example, adopting a framework that is school-wide. If you think that that's too big or too constraining, you might go team-wide, or you might go grade-wide. Okay, we're going to go on a field trip, and I could only take you on one field trip. So I decided that I would take you to this place because I can do it in a couple of minutes, and this is 5 minutes, and I don't want to take that time. So I collected all your permission slips, and here we go. I may have to, can you guys see that? Or do you still see the slide?
You see it.
You can see it, okay. So not everybody uses Google Classroom, but that's the only learning management system that I had access to for this demonstration. So what I've done is I've gone through and I've made a mock classroom that tries to incorporate all 11, not necessarily 11 because I didn't have a specialist here to look at it, but at least 10 of those recommendations for really enhancing and building up the structures of the Tier 1B setting, meaning the home setting. And so you can see that I have, you know, science, Logan, block 2, and I kept it as clear and easy as possible. So when the student clicks in here, the stream that I'm talking about, if you aren't aware, is this stream right here. This is where kids open up first. And I can see where you might want to use this as a greeting for students, but what I would recommend is just put one greeting there. You know, something that just makes them feel welcomed for opening up your class. But I really highly recommend that you save this space for things like emergency announcements, especially for older content areas. And also you want to save this for any sort of emergency or high priority item. As you click on classwork, you're going to notice that instead of designing my classroom by topic, I have designed my classroom by date. And so now I can better serve my students that maybe missed work on a Tuesday or missed work on a Wednesday. Instead of using the name of the assignment to try to lead them back to that, and they may not remember the name of the assignment, but it's pretty easy to go back to, oh, you missed school on Thursday? Great, let's go back to Thursday's lesson. It's a lot easier to find where you are and to figure out what you're missing in much more of a chronological order. And then over here, you'll have a running stream of dates that will appear over here as well. So it's a lot easier to navigate where you are. And then by putting all of the items in the date that you need, you can create a to-do list, because as the teacher, you can put these in the order that you want them to be. So I've set up this classroom or this lesson, for example, to incorporate some of the other things that we talked about. So some family engagement pieces. You could put a family letter at the beginning of the week, or you could put a family letter at the beginning of a unit. But this is a way to try to give as much information and support to the family from the get-go that you can. Then in the lesson, and as they go through each of these, the circles turn from blue to gray. And so when that's done, that's done. If I click into the lesson, everything that I need for this lesson appears in front of me. And because I would teach my children where I wanted them to go first, I would always teach them to find the lesson first. Like, before you look at anything else, find the lesson first, because the lesson is going to prepare you for what you need to do. And then what I've done is I've created a slide where I have a lot more availability to creating things that are easier on the eyes and a little bit easier to navigate if they need to. And so here I've got a light blue background, light purple background, a little bit bigger text, a little bit darker text, and then a to-do list of what they need to do. And then I've highlighted the actions that they're gonna do, and they wouldn't know that unless I told them. But, you know, so you would explain to them that, oh, the things that are highlighted in yellow are the things that I'm gonna grade, or are the things that I'm gonna collect, or the things we're gonna talk about when you come back the next day. Okay, and then if there's another item that you want them to do that's separate from the lesson, you can set it here. If this is like a different thing, and then as they view the assignment, that piece will show up there for them, and then they can turn it in. And when they turn it in, that circle has now become gray, and so they can track where they are. You can incorporate other pieces like the question, and so you can use this as an exit ticket for what they learned in the lesson. And then there's the lesson survey. This is another opportunity for you to get parents involved. And so when the child is done doing that work for the day, you know, you would hope that you could instill this participation in your families, but have them create a lesson survey. This was completed independently. This assignment was confusing, or I would like to speak to you about this assignment. And that will go into a database for you to look at which parents need help without having to sift through all of your email. And then PBIS, kids that finish their assignment can log their points for the day. So maybe they're earning points for something. I completed my assignment, I get 2 points, I get to submit that. Well, then what happens is, and I don't have it on the screen here, but on the teacher side, they then have a spreadsheet that calculates the child's name and how many points they've earned. So I can look it up by kid. If my son Reese or my student Reese wants to know how many points he's earned in October, I can go into the spreadsheet, type in Reese, and see all the points that he has earned in October. And then, you can incorporate some physical pieces to that as well later on. So that is your field trip for today. Okay, so some data-based decision-making. You want to really quantify rather your data for easier problem solving. So the problem we're still dealing with is, engagement, work completion, accountability, things like that. So what data do you have or that you could collect regarding engagement and accountability in the hybrid model? And how can you use that data to plan a path forward? So let's say we're looking at remote assignment completion. Grade 5 is currently completing assignments 45% of the time. Grade 6, 67%. Grade 7 is only 13% of the time. And so of course these are red because that's, those are danger zones. This is approaching the goal. But our goal really through our LMS with the supports that we can build into the LMS is to try to get at least 80% of that participation as possible. And so some things that you could try with the grade levels is a community campaign, a friendly contest, a group reward for reaching goals. You could do that in the actual physical setting on the days that students are there. You could do it once a month. You could do it, over the course of a quarter or a semester. And so to answer where the other 15% is, ideally you want your tier 1B to be structured in a way that can achieve at least 80% remote completion. And then the other 15%, like on a typical day, is going to need additional supports. So an extra small group at school, more days to get work in, support with goals, support with confidence building, things like that. Okay, so with data analysis, going to ask, what does the data show you? Are there things that stick out? Is it the same kids all the time? Is it a certain like category of kids, that are having trouble with this? Are there patterns? And then what are your decision rules? How are you going to track the progress? And when are you going to try new approaches or modify the approach that you were using? And then as always, prevention and matching. So you want to prevention first, so build up, as much supports within the system as you can, and then intentionally match interventions that fit the source of the problem, which you can administer the next day, even if that means just training on how to access the work independently. So this is just a very quick way to think about some of the ways of the family engagement and accountability. So we talked about the family letter, the lesson survey, and then also you can offer opportunities to let them know specifically how they can help their child succeed, because some parents might not know what you're looking for. So like, for example, prioritizing, you might want to have a conversation with parents either collectively like open office or through a letter or like a Zoom call or something where you might tell them what you expect in terms of priority. So, when time runs out or effort has run out, these are the most important parts. So that way they don't have to die on every single hill. If a kid is really struggling with something or the parent is super stressed and doesn't have a lot of time, because that's going to happen, then they can say, okay, we really have to do this, but we can hold off or make a plan for these other items. And even sometimes just giving permission to the parent to say that it's okay to prioritize if you have to. This is the way that I would like you to attempt it if possible. Then that can go a long way. And then there are some other ways that you can do some tier 2 and tier 3, which would probably start at school and then you'd transfer them into the virtual world. So here's a reflection point, and you're going to get these slides in an email almost immediately after the lesson, or not the lesson, the session. The email's already drafted. I just didn't want to send it until I had a chance to deliver the content. But, you know, so some things to ask yourself. Does your school use a consistent framework for setting up an LMS? That can go a long way in increasing engagement and accountability. Were children given an opportunity to share their voice? I know, for example, my child would rather sit down and do an entire worksheet in pencil of long division, but ask him to sit in front of iReady for 15 minutes and he's not paying a lick of attention. He can't stand the videos in iReady. He doesn't like the voices, he doesn't like the cartoons. And so for him, you know, it's better if we can provide something that they are gonna, you know, at least be more willing to attempt. Were they given direct instruction in the LMS, even retrospectively? So I realized that probably most kids didn't get some of that direct instruction back in the spring, but we can go back and do that now. So if you have kids that are still not getting the work done, it could just be that they're really uncomfortable with navigating the learning management system for all of the reasons that we've talked about. And then were parents given direct instruction on how to function in the LMS? Have they been trained on where to find things and how it's all set up? And then of course, we're back to relationships. Are you taking enough time building relationships? Teacher to student, student to student, that came up a few minutes at the beginning. Student to teacher, am I comfortable going to my teacher? And then teacher to parent. And you know, if at the start of this school year, for example, if you jumped right into content on the in-person days and right into content on the virtual days, and you didn't take enough time to really get to know and have fun and do some relationship building, that could be contributing to that as well. So when you get the email, you'll be able to explore all of these different links, but these are some resources around the Webverse that I found that I thought could be super relevant for thinking about meeting the challenge of this process. And I did highlight 3 that I thought were the most important, because there's a lot here. So if you wanted to look for kind of where to start, those were the 3 that I would recommend you starting with. So what's next? That's where we would consider our data, consider our kids, consider our tier 1, and make sure that our tier 1B was created for accessibility and as much support as possible. Then we can create an action plan for how we're going to work through whatever problems still exist once you're done creating that. And so we won't do it because I do want to give some time for questions if possible. But you would, you know, what are you going to do? What is it that you're trying to achieve? You know, when are you going to check in and see if it's working? And then who's going to be responsible for doing that action? And then, of course, we want to keep our eyes on equity. What supplemental action steps will be implemented for certain subgroups that we need to sometimes think of as well that are in our universal setting, but may need something even a little extra in that universal setting. So economically disadvantaged kids, English learners, race, ethnicity, minority students, foster or homeless students, migrant students, and students that have disabilities that are functioning by themselves when they're not in actual virtual classes with their teacher. Okay, so this is open discussion time, which I left 7 minutes for, which I'm kind of proud of because a lot of times I go well over. And now I know what I need to back up on for future sessions. So go ahead and open up your mic and we can have some discussion.
I'm just wondering if the PowerPoint or the video is available.
Yes, so the PowerPoint is going to be sent to you in the email that I'm sending at the end of the session. And then I also put links to the video, and I also did a screencast of the Google Classroom for folks that might want to go back and look at that, and that video is in there as well.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and the PDFs of the fill-in forms are there too, and they're fillable, so you can do them online or you can download it and write it in if you wanted to use those.
This is very helpful. A lot of great resources. I appreciate that.
Had anybody thought to think about it in terms of a tier 1 before? I'm wondering if that's, if you know, does that ring a bell, or are you thinking that that's, you know, that's something that is not relevant? I'm curious as to what the reactions are to that sort of approach.
I really appreciated how you split it, the 1A and 1B, so then I could visually see, because it was sort of universal and I couldn't separate it personally, you know, like even though it was two completely different things. So for me, that was good to see.
Awesome.
Yeah, I didn't necessarily think of it as a tier 1A or tier 1B or anything like that. However, there was a lot of very good information in there, and it was very timely because it really is around a lot of the conversation that we're having in schools and in my schools right now. I really like the part there of that you had highlighted at the very end for the resources. I'd really like to explore that a little bit more later, and I'm sure that we'll put that to very good use.
Yeah, you know, because one thing that I was trying to think of when this topic came through, I was really trying to think about things that we can control and things that we can't control and things that we can try to influence. We can control our physical settings. We can't control the outside setting. So we have to try and bridge as best as we can so that we can influence, you know, that engagement and influence that kind of thing. And, you know, don't be afraid to hold kids as accountable for that work as, you know, depending on the age group, you know, and then come up with other ways to help them meet that setting. But you can't force people to do things. You can simply encourage and influence. Any other thoughts or ideas that you want to put into the open discussion? Another thing someone said earlier in the session was the student-to-student interaction. And I got thinking about that as well, that they may need some training or actual direct instruction on how to do that in the Zoom setting, right? Because even adults were worried about talking over people and also everybody's listening too, right? So if I'm nervous to talk to even one peer and I've got a whole classroom full of kids that are listening in, at the same time, you know, that can inhibit that student-to-student interaction. So creating, you know, accountability partners, pods of kids, really building up some of those relationships, and then explicitly teaching like some interaction etiquette in those settings might also help with that, not feeling so flat, you know, with feeling like you're doing all the talking. But I don't think it's going to be intrinsic. I think that's something that we have to nurture first. Okay, so I would really like to thank Jean Demers of RSU 14 for submitting today's topic for discussion. I did get some other topics through the form, and but I picked one that I thought was going to be as relevant as possible for a majority of people. I figured if Jean was struggling or she knew teachers that were struggling with engagement and accountability, that it's likely that others were as well. And so these sessions are going to be fueled, again, by you, by the field. I really want to spend some time kind of figuring out how I can best meet the needs that are actually out there instead of trying to anticipate what the needs are going to be. And then Jean can attest to this, that once I decided that her topic was going to be the one that I used, I reached out to her and I asked her a few questions about what it was that specifically that she was looking for, so that I could really try to tailor helping her, but then create it in a way that was going to hopefully spread around and be a broader audience for most of you. And so the link to the form is going to be in the email as well, that you'll get this afternoon. And then of course it's here in the live slide deck as well, if you're looking through and you want to click to it. But let me know what things you need, And I will do my best to find the expert that can help you, or put together something that can help you have, you know, have as good of a year and feeling supported as possible. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Andrea. This was really good. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
You're welcome.